And also happening at the White House today, there's a lot. We just got news about this. Some federal workers are set to receive another email on Saturday asking them to give 5 bullet points on what they did this past week. Remember, this email stirred up a lot of controversy when it was first sent out by the Office of Personnel Management just last Saturday. The difference this time, though, is the sender will be from the heads of different federal agencies instead of the OPM. More on that later when we get it. Hundreds of employees at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration were fired by DOJ as the Trump administration works to cut the federal workforce. The administration says no one who was deemed critical was affected, but a CBS News source at the National Weather Service, which operates within NOAA, says that some meteorologists were fired. Many of the laid-off employees were probationary workers. Now, this is coming as a federal judge in San Francisco ruled that the mass firings of federal probationary workers by Elon Musk's DOJ team was likely unlawful. But it is unclear right now how this ruling will affect those who already lost their federal jobs, including veterans, many of whom work for the federal government after leaving the military. So CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi joins us now with the latest on this confusion within the federal workforce. Olivia, what could this ruling mean for the probationary workers who were already fired?
Well, we heard from a federal judge last night who ruled essentially that the actions of the Office of Personnel Management deeming these directives, sending them out to people that led to this mass firing was probably illegal, that the Office of Personnel Management doesn't have the authority essentially to make these broad mass firings of probationary workers across the government. I want to read what the judge, who is a California judge who was appointed by Bill Clinton, said specifically about this issue. He said, quote, "The OPM does not have any authority whatsoever under any statute in the history of the universe to hire or fire employees but its own." Which raises an interesting legal point about the actions of OPM and DOJ in really pushing forward these mass firings of probationary employees and whether or not they actually have any legal standing to do so. Now, this has been argued by labor unions, federal employees who have been laid off. So it does raise that question of what exactly happens to those people who have already been laid off. But essentially, it's pulling back the executive orders and the direction of President Trump and the federal government to fire these people. But as you mentioned, this is all coming as we're learning about yet another email that's going to go to federal employee workers at the end of this week, perhaps tomorrow, that is going to ask them again, what did you do last week? And we're told that this is something that's likely going to become a weekly occurrence as President Trump, his administration, Elon Musk, and DOJ really look to shrink the size of this federal workforce.
Wow. Okay. Rinaldi, Olivia, I have to ask you about those NOAA workers we talked about, hundreds of them basically getting fired. But why is there so much concern about this particular agency and cuts to the agency?
Yeah, we're learning about 880 or so workers from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They're part of these layoffs. And we're also learning that it includes people at the National Weather Service. Now, we were told by this administration that there would not be any meteorologists, which are deemed critical, that would be part of the layoffs. But we have heard from the National Weather Service that they were part of the layoffs here. And there were about 400 or so probationary employees at the National Weather Service who are part of these targeted layoffs. But this is, you know, it goes beyond just meteorology and weather patterns. This is about the climate. This is about this economy, the U.S. economy, and the National Weather Service often, or the National Weather Service often sends out directives about weather, transportation, and as we know, air transportation, water transportation, critical to our economy and moving goods throughout the country. So this is some critical work. I do want to read something that Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington did say. She's a Democrat, but she pointed to these cuts and she called it a direct hit at the economy because NOAA's specialized workforce provides products and services that support more than a third of the nation's GDP, arguing that this is going to have broad impacts beyond just, cutting meteorologists and people who send out weather alerts, but what can actually impact our economy at that really granular level. So we'll have to see how this really impacts people. But essentially, Democrats arguing that this has a broader impact than what we're just seeing.
Olivia, I want to stick with this issues of firing here because, as we've been saying since all of this started, one of the agencies most affected by the firings was USAID. The State Department said plans were in place to end 90% of contracts, but it would keep those relating to health and safety. But some nonprofits who were funded through the program, they're saying that has not been the case. So what do we know about this back and forth right now?
Right. We're seeing those mass layoffs happening at USAID and the dissolving of the contracts that really impact humanitarian work across not only the U.S. but also across the globe. I did speak this morning to the UN agency, United Nations Agency to Combat AIDS. This is something that the U.S. has been a part of since its inception, and they told me we learned that the U.S. government contract as part of this was dissolved. This was one of the contracts that the government has said let go. That doesn't align with their priorities. They told me this morning, they called it a serious development. They said it impacts the entire HIV response around the globe, not only for civil partners, but countries as well, and people living and infected with HIV. And of course, there was a huge push by the U.S. to really combat HIV and AIDS across the globe, realizing that if we combat it abroad, we can really stem the effects of it here at home. Now, there is no longer that arm of the U.S. that will be working in contingency with the United Nations to combat this on a global scale. They told me this is devastating to this work and will certainly have impacts beyond just, not providing aid and resources, but perhaps impacts here at home.
Yeah, a lot of changes within the federal government so far. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much for your time today.